Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Prime Minister is with me. Prime Minister, last time you were here, you had a lot of authority. The party was ahead of the general election campaign, which you didn't need to call. Can you apologise to the Conservative Party for the way you handled that campaign?
Well, Andrew, it's great to be back here at Party Conference in Manchester. And this week's going to be a really good opportunity for us to show the mission of this government, which is what I say. I'll answer your question in a minute. It's a real opportunity to show the mission of this government, which was the mission that I set out when I became Prime Minister, standing on the steps of number 10 Downing Street, which is a government that focuses on the needs of ordinary working people, and a government that really does build a country that works for everyone. And you'll see in some of the announcements we've made today about student finance and housing, we've also listened to the message that came from that election. But I've been very clear that I called the election, I led the campaign, I take my responsibility, and I'm sorry that some very good members of Parliament lost their seats and some very good people who were candidates didn't gain those seats. But what you'll hear from us this week as a Conservative Party and a government is how we are going to move forward, how we're going to address the issues that are of real concern to people, and we're going to build that country for everyone.
We will come to all of those, but you and I know there's a difference. If you bump your car into somebody else's car, you may be sorry the accident has happened, but that's different from apologising to the driver of the other car. So can I ask you again, can you apologise to the Conservative Party for what happened in that election campaign?
Well, I've spoken to my members of Parliament. I'll be speaking later today to the party activists. Look, throughout my entire life, I have worked for the Conservative Party, and I know people who went out during that election who worked really hard, and I'm sorry that the result wasn't the one that all of us wanted. I mean, there's going to be a lot of analysis of this election, because if you look at it, we got 2.3 million more votes. We had our highest vote share for over 30 years. We took seats we didn't think we were going to take. We got more members of Parliament in Scotland, and yet we didn't get that majority. So what I'll be saying to people is, yes, we've got to look at what happened during that election. We've got to listen to the electorate, listen to voters, the messages they were giving us. I think one of the things they were telling me was that some of those issues that I addressed when I first became Prime Minister, that I identified.
You completely forgot about them.
I think the message, we didn't get that message across sufficiently during the election campaign, but I think what voters were saying were they felt those even more keenly than perhaps we'd realised. That's what we're addressing at this conference.
Let's come to what you're addressing at the conference and these two big policy announcements. The tuition fees is a huge U-turn. You can smell the burning rubber all over Manchester.
No, what we're going to do on student finance... Look,
no, I'm sorry, it is a U-turn. Can you at least agree that?
Andrew, let's just look at what we're saying today in relation to student finance. What became clear is this isn't just an issue. Often people think about student finance as something that just worries students themselves. Of course, this is something that parents and grandparents are concerned about in terms of debt. So we have a system that provides funding for universities. We have a system that ensures more people can go to university, but people are worried about the level of debt that the students build up. So we will look at it again, but we are saying that we're going to raise that threshold at which you start to pay, which means that for those who are able to take full benefit of that, it'll be £30 a month more money into graduates' pockets. And we will scrap the intended increase in the level of fees.
Let's try again. That policy that you stoutly defended for years, which ended up with £9,000 a year fees for students, did that work? Was that a wrong policy? Was it a failure as a policy?
No, what that policy has done has meant that there's money for universities.
So why are you
What the policy has done has meant that there are more students going to university. But when we set that policy, what we expected was going to happen is there'd be a range, a diversity in the system, that we'd see universities perhaps offering shorter courses, that we'd see universities offering courses at fees under the maximum of the fee. That hasn't happened. We've got to look at it again.
OK, you're looking at it again. Is it possible that out of this you come up with a different system, that, for instance, there's some kind of graduate tax instead of the current system?
Well, by looking at it again, we'll be looking at the issues that people are raising, we'll be looking at where the system has worked, we'll be looking at the concerns that people have. But
so a graduate tax is possible? That's what I'm asking.
All I'm saying, Andrew, is that we're looking at it again. If I had determined here and now what we were going to be doing in the future, then I wouldn't be saying that we were going to spend time looking at this. I think it's right that in the meantime what we do is we say we will scrap that intended increase in the fees, because it is the case that we'd expected some universities to charge less than the maximum, and they're not.
The Labour Party has offered to remove student fees entirely and put it on taxpayers' backs, as it were. Is it possible that the Conservatives will agree that the majority of this money should be paid for by general taxation, not by students?
I think what the Labour Party has got...
I'm asking about your policy.
Yes, and I'm going to answer your question. But the Labour Party has got this wrong in two areas. One of these is that, of course, the Labour Party made a lot of promises during the election to students, some of which they've now already gone back on. They gave students the impression they were going to abolish student debt. Now they've said that they can't do that. But the Labour Party's policy is based on the idea that somebody who goes to university, who benefits from university, who earns more in their future life, should be paid for by somebody who never goes to university and who may be struggling to get by.
We all benefit from the fact that they have been to university, they're better educated, they're perhaps earning more money, they're more creative and so forth. We all get that benefit, so perhaps we all should be putting into that.
Well,
that was always what Conservative governments, as well as Labour ones, thought.
What I believe is that graduates, people who go to university, who benefit from that university education in a very personal sense, yes, they make contributions to society, but so actually do the people who don't go to university and who are paying their taxes. They're making a contribution to society as well. But if you get a better career, if you earn more during your life as a result of going to university, I think it's right that you make a contribution.
Out there, there's lots and lots of people who've left university and now have debts of £50,800 on their shoulders. How much of that debt is going to be affected by your change in policy?
Well, as I say, we're looking again at this issue. We're making two changes which will be effective in terms of graduates. For the one that we're raising the threshold, it's for somebody who went to university from autumn 2012. They will be affected. For those who take are able to have the full benefit of raising the threshold from 21,000 to 25,000. This means graduates having more money in their pockets.
How much more money?
It'll be £30 a month.
So a relatively small amount of money. £300 and something a year.
It's £360 a year.
£360
but
a year.
It is a change, and it gives them some more money in their pockets.
The students who are watching, that sounds, compared to, as it were, the banquet that Jeremy Corbyn is offering, that sounds like a bit of a dry biscuit.
Well, the point about the banquet that Jeremy Corbyn claimed to be able to offer is that he can't deliver on it. Look, you can only do this if you have a balanced approach to the economy, which is what we have. What would Jeremy Corbyn do? He'd wreck the economy. It's not just me saying that. The Labour Party... Andrew, this is an important point. At the Labour Party conference, the Labour Party themselves recognised that they would wreck our economy.
I don't think
they can't deliver.
I don't remember that speech.
Run on the pound from Labour? That's what they said a Labour Party would mean in this country.
OK, what's happened to the pound on your watch?
The pound fluctuates, but a run on the pound...
It goes down and down and down. It's worth a lot less than it was.
Do you know what a run on the pound, Andrew? It means people queuing up to take their money out of banks. It means people really worried about their futures. That's what a run on the pound would do. It means an economy that is going into free fall. That's what Labour would do.
Meanwhile, the economy on your watch is the slowest growing economy in Europe. Why has that happened?
We have seen, well, let's look back. A lot of people said that actually this is an economy that post the Brexit vote wouldn't even be growing. But it is growing.
Just about.
What we need to do is a number of things. Of course, we have to get that Brexit deal right and get those negotiations right and deliver a successful future for the relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union. But there are other issues that we need to address in our economy. That's why it's right for us to take a balanced approach to what we do in the economy. So we are careful with public sector finances, but we also need to ensure that across the whole of the country, people are seeing the benefits of free trade, the benefits of the free market economy.
Let's talk about the benefits, because as you know, out there, the free market economy, capitalism, or whatever you call it, is rather unpopular. Only 17% of people, 17% in a recent poll, said they thought that capitalism was working for them. Those students who come out of universities with the debt are then looking for a proper job. They're looking for a decent job paying decent wages. Roughly speaking, what is the average wage at the moment?
Well, the average earnings...
Average weekly wage.
The average earnings are around the sort of £25,000 a
so
year
the
figure.
Average weekly wage is around £505. Can I ask you a much more important question? On your watch, has it gone up or has it gone down?
Well, what we've seen happening recently, of course, is that inflation is inflation has gone up and people are feeling a squeeze on their incomes. What is important, but you raised the point about students coming out.
This is real. I mean, people have lost money over the last few years under the Conservatives.
You said students coming out of university want to have a high-paid job.
They do.
That's exactly what I want to ensure that we can provide for them. Now, how do we do that? We don't do that by adopting Labour's policies of just spending, spending, spending and borrowing, borrowing, borrowing. That leads to fewer jobs, it leads to lower wages, leads to less money being spent on public services. What we do, and you just have to look at our record as a government, what we've done is we've been dealing with the deficit, it's down by 2/3. At the same time, we've been putting record levels of finance into our public services. But we've also seen an economy that's growing. 3 million more people now in work, with the security that a job gives for them and their families since the Conservatives came into government. Yes, it is true. Thank you for admitting it.
Let's keep on the record, however, because this is about whether the system is working for most people. We've talked about debt-laden students, but we also know that average weekly wages have fallen and fallen and fallen under the Conservatives. People feel worse off because they are worse off, and that is a big problem for this government. And then, of course, they want to buy houses. Thatcherism was always based on the property-owning democracy and people's ability to buy houses. And for most people, that is now going out of sight completely. If you're under 40 or so, your chances of saving for the deposit for a house are worse now than they have ever been.
And I recognise, and I said this when I first became Prime Minister, first of all, that for a lot of people, they feel that changes, globalisation, that other people have benefited and they haven't.
Yeah.
And we need to address that. That's why the focus of this party conference is about a country that works for everyone. It's about ensuring that we get that growth and prosperity across the whole of the country. And you're absolutely right. Housing is a key issue in this area. What is a Conservative mission? A mission of Conservatives, for Conservatives, is to ensure that every generation can look to a better future than the past. But sadly today, there are young people who fear they're going to be worse off than their parents in the future, that they're never going to get on the housing ladder. That's why one of the focuses we're putting on this week and as a government is on housing. But it's not just about home ownership.
How much money have you found for the Help to Buy scheme?
There's going to be £10 billion into Help to Buy.
Where does that come from?
It's not just, well, we're going to be setting out our finances in the budget. But can I just, because you talked about home ownership, and Help to Buy is about helping people to own their own homes. But you know, there are a lot of people in rented accommodation today, and that's an important issue for us to address as well. And if you're, you know, it used to be the case that a lot of the people who would be in renting accommodation, renting homes, would perhaps be young professionals who didn't mind if they had to move quite frequently. Today we see more and more families in rented accommodation.
And a lot of it is poor quality as well.
Well, there's issues about quality, but also often short tenancies. And if you're a family, that is so unsettling for you. One of the things we're going to be looking at is how we can incentivise landlords to give longer-term tenancies. You talk about poor quality. One of the other things we're going to be doing is ensuring that landlords have to be part of a redress scheme so that tenants are actually able directly to take action if there are problems about the quality of their homes. So, yes, it's about home ownership. Yes, it's about building more houses, it's about helping people who want to buy, but it's also about ensuring that those who are in the rented sector are being helped as well. So it's across the board.
And it's about finding the money for all of this. During the election campaign, you said to some nurses that you didn't have a magic money tree. You've spent so far £1.3 billion on the tuition fees U-turn this morning and another £10 billion on the new housing policy. This is proving to be a very, very expensive morning. In the last 8 minutes, we've spent nearly £12 billion. Where's it coming from?
Well, we will set all this out in the budget, Andrew. You just have to be patient for a few weeks to see everything, because then we can set it out in the context of what we're doing in other areas in the budget as well. What is important, I said in the announcements that we're making today, is that we have listened to what people said at the election, and we recognise there are key areas which we need to address. That's what you will see at this party conference. As we go through this week, it's about building a better future for everyone. It's about ensuring that the next generation can feel that they are going to have a better future than their parents.
Well, let's talk about everyone. Let's talk about another group we haven't yet mentioned, people on universal benefit. Now, as you'll have seen, there are 12 Tory MPs who want you to pause the rollout of universal benefit, and they want you to do that because there are lots and lots of people out there who are going to get no money at all for 6 weeks, and that begs the question, how are they going to eat?
Well, this is, I recognise that there have been problems in the way that universal credit has been working out for people. That's something that David Gauke, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, and I are looking at. I think fundamentally, most people agree universal credit is a good system because it is a system that ensures that work always pays and that the more you earn, the more you're able to keep. I think that's right.
It's the implementation of it now.
Yes.
Might you pause that rollout?
It's the implementation of it now. I think because this is an important change to the benefit system, so I think it's important that we do roll it out, but we are looking at the specific issues that are being raised by people about that implementation to ensure, because
so there might be a pause of some kind to ensure the implementation works.
We need to roll out universal credit. What we also need to do is to ensure that we're addressing the specific issues that are being raised by people.
Can I remind you of what Dame Louise Casey, who's been your advisor, been Labour Party government's advisors on this social policy for a very, very long time to come. She's a very experienced woman on that. She has said we are looking at more and more people ending up homeless or ending up having their kids taken away or ending up in more dire circumstances, more dire than I think we have seen in this country for years. It's a cliff edge point. Everybody's holding out until we're pressing on, we're pressing on, we're pressing on. It's like jumping over a cliff. And for lots of people out there, that is how it feels.
I think the important thing is that we make sure that the benefit change that we're doing, which I think everybody also agrees is a change that, where it has been put into place, is seeing more people getting helped into the workplace, is having that benefit for people. But what we need to ensure is that when as the system is rolled out and when it is in place, we are addressing specific issues that people are raising. But this is
the universal credit.
You may have
seen a woman interviewed on the BBC who said she had 4p left after asking for money for 2 weeks and she didn't know how she was going to eat. This is a real problem for lots of people who are watching this programme out there now.
And I've accepted, Andrew, that there have been issues, that there have been problems with the rollout. And what I'm saying is that this is something that David Gauke and I are looking at. But overall, it's important that this benefit change is important because it does see more people being helped into the workplace. I think there is a general agreement that changing to universal credit is the right thing to do. What we need to ensure is that as we're implementing that, we deal with these problems that have arisen.
But you have heard that there is a problem at the moment that you're looking at.
What we have seen is that the performance, if you like, in terms of getting money to people, has been improving. So this is not something that is stuck. It's something that is getting better, but I recognise that we need to ensure that that improvement continues.
OK, one other big domestic issue, and again out there, even among Conservative supporters and Conservative voters, 2/3 of people would like to see the railway industry renationalised. Can you really look rail commuters in the eye and say that privatisation has worked for them?
Well, look, I recognise that not everything's perfect, and if you're on Southern Railways, you probably certainly think that with all the strikes and disruptions that they have had. But I can remember the days when the railways were nationalised, and what people get today is a far better service than what they got under the nationalised railways. They get more investment in the railways, they get greater reliability, there are far more passengers using the railways, the number of journeys that it's possible to make on the railways has increased, the number of services has significantly increased. So we do see a better service today. I can see if you're a passenger who's perhaps on Southern and has been experiencing the problems, I can see that people feel, is this actually working for us? But it is a better system today. We're seeing better services, greater reliability, greater choice for people, and more people using the railways. And I'm sure we all agree that actually getting people off the roads and using our railways is a good thing for all of us.
Now, let's turn to the other big issue, which is Brexit. You got the chance to have a private meeting with Angela Merkel this week. Did you get the impression from her that your Florence speech has unblocked things?
Well, I did have a private meeting with Angela Merkel. I was also, because I was at the informal EU Council, had the opportunity to speak to other EU leaders as well. And I certainly got the impression and was being told that they had welcomed the Florence speech, that the Florence speech had given a momentum to the negotiations. But it's not just leaders who've said that. Actually, if you look at what Michel Barnier said at the end of the week, he was very clear that that speech had changed things. And I think the negotiations over the last week were conducted in a more positive framework, in a more constructive framework, and have taken us further on key issues such as citizens' rights. I always said that was one of the first issues we needed to address. On key issues such as citizens' rights, we're continuing to make progress. One or two issues that still need to be finalised, but there's great agreement between us for EU citizens living here, who I want to keep here. I value the contribution they've made here in the UK, but also UK citizens living in the other 27 countries.
Well, since you raised that particular issue, what the EU has said in absolute terms is the European Court of Justice must remain involved, and you haven't gone far enough as a government to accept that.
No, if you look at what...
Might you go further is what I'm asking.
If you look at what Michel Barnier said, he said that there should be a role for the European Court of Justice. In the past, they've said there was an absolute that the European Court of Justice had to be looking over this issue. What I've said is very simply that we will bring this agreement into UK law so that if there is a EU citizen here who is concerned that the agreement that we've made on their rights is not being kept to by the government in the future, that they can take that through our UK courts. Our UK courts are well respected,
right.
And what our UK courts will do, as they would do anyway, is take account of judgments from the European Court of Justice.
Let me ask you about one other very important period, which is this transition period. After we have left the EU in March 2019, there's now a 2-year transition period where we will carry on paying in money and so forth. During that transition period, if and when the law changes in the rest of the EU, do we accept those legal changes and regulations or not?
Well, can I just perhaps...
It's a really important question.
It is an important question, and can I just perhaps start by explaining what that period is about? Because I think the use of the term transition sometimes gets people thinking that maybe this is something that is going to carry, we won't leave, it'll carry on.
Well, let's assume we are leaving.
Well, this is a very important point, Andrew, because this is about an implementation period. We will leave the European Union in March 2019, but at that point we will have an agreement as to what the future relationship, the future partnership between us and the European Union will be. That's what you might call the end state, where we're going to get to.
Right.
But in order to ensure that individuals, people and businesses don't have a sudden cliff edge, that they have time to adjust to that, do practical things like IT system changes and so forth, we will have that 2-year implementation period.
2-year period, do we accept the EU rules, yes or no?
During that period, I have said that in order, if the point of this, part of the point of this, is that there's no change for people, that they can adjust against a background of certainty of what the rules are going to be, that we will... abiding by the framework that we've got. That's one of the things that's happening in Parliament at the moment.
So if
the EU law is being brought into UK law through our withdrawal bill.
If the banking law changes in the EU during that transition period, do our banks abide by the change, is the real question.
Well, and the point
Yes
is that as part of the negotiation about what the agreement is going to be for that implementation period, it will be important for us to look at how we're going to ensure that we deal with any changes that come through. Now, there may be...
I don't hear that as a yes or a no.
But the point is, Andrew, we're going into a negotiation.
Okay.
And if you think about this issue of changes...
Okay.
We're not
going to make progress in this. Can I just ask you about one other thing?
Well, this is important. We want to have people to have certainty during that period, so businesses can carry on with their businesses, so we don't see jobs being lost as a result of uncertainty during that period.
If we get no deal, which you have said is possible, if we get no deal, what happens immediately after that?
Well, as I've said, we are recognising that, I've used that phrase of no deal is better than a bad deal. Government is working on what would need to be put in place if there was no deal. What we're also working on is ensuring we get a deal, and we get the right deal for the United Kingdom.
But things like, would the planes keep flying? There's lots and lots of practical things. Out there are tens of thousands of business people who are scared witless about the prospect of no deal. which they still think is possible. And I'm asking you, what happens on day 2 after no deal?
And that's why government departments are looking to see what changes are needed, what we need to put in place. It's not just government departments doing that. The EU withdrawal bill and other legislation that we will bring through in the wake of that will actually be setting the scene for, yes, us having a deal, but also the possibility of a no deal.
No deal would be so difficult for this country, in many people's views, including Philip Hammond's. Very, very bad, he said. If you couldn't get a deal, would you resign as Prime Minister?
Well, I'm working to get a deal, Andrew, and I think that is what the whole focus of government is, on making sure that we get a deal. So let's put our efforts into that.
Okay.
Let's do everything that we can, not just to get a deal, but to get a deal that works for the UK. And I believe that the deal that works for the UK will also work for the EU. That's why I'm optimistic that we can get that deal.
Can I put it to you that I'm asking you very straightforward questions and you're not answering them? And this happened during the election campaign as well, which is why you got in so much trouble. Can we just remind ourselves what happened when you did another U-turn on the so-called dementia tax? This is what you said.
The first question you asked, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. We are offering a long-term solution for the sustainability of social care for the future.
But we all knew something had changed, and that was a pivotal moment in the campaign, and your own advisers were aghast at that, sort of ashen-faced at that. Nothing has changed. And again, you're saying nothing has changed. It's not a U-turn on tuition fees. These are U-turns. Wouldn't you be better off actually just looking people in the eye and telling them the truth?
No, look, on student fees, we have made a change. Yes, I've said that. We're raising the threshold and we're scrapping that, that limit and thing.
Things had changed too, hadn't they?
The principle hadn't changed. The system that we were proposing was remaining the same in terms of the contributions that people were making. Yes, we were going to introduce a cap, but the fundamental principle had remained. But the point is, Andrew, sometimes you ask me hypothetical questions, and I won't answer hypothetical questions.
Let me ask you a very non-hypothetical question, an absolutely clear non-hypothetical question. You've apologised for aspects of the general election campaign, but you did not have to call that election. Do you now think it was a mistake to call that election itself?
No. Is it ever a mistake to give people the opportunity to vote? I don't think so. I don't think... I mean, at the stage, of course, I wanted to see a different result, and I'd hoped for a different result from that general election. But what we must do now is learn from that general election, take those lessons forward. That's what I'm doing. It's what government is doing. I think the key message from that election, for me, one of the key messages was that obviously we didn't get across what we were doing in terms of a country that works for everyone and really wanting to build on that. I think what we also saw from the election is that as Conservatives, the arguments that we thought we'd had and won during the 1980s about the importance of free market economies, I think we thought there was a general consensus on that, and we now see that there wasn't, and we now need to make those arguments again.
As a result of those mistakes, you arrive here with diminished authority. Your cabinet are fighting like rats in a sack. They're briefing the papers. There's one minister quoted today saying either Theresa May sacks Boris Johnson for the way he's been behaving, or she's out herself. Can we at least acknowledge you have a problem of authority in your cabinet?
What I have is a cabinet that are united united in the mission of this government, Andrew, and that's what you will see this week.
A nest of singing birds.
United in a mission to build a country that works for everyone, and agreed on the approach that we take in Florence. That's what I had a cabinet meeting before my Florence speech. Everybody agreed that the position the United Kingdom was taking was absolutely the right one. We're going forward on that basis. But what you'll hear from us this week is what the mission of this Conservative government is for people.
Sure. But if it's a nest of singing birds, it's a nest with at least one enormous cuckoo and several vultures sitting in it as well. This is a cabinet that is not agreeing on very fundamental questions about Brexit. We have seen Boris Johnson publicly demanding more red lines, saying publicly the Prime Minister must now do this, 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 and by the way, on public sector pay she must do this. How can you tolerate somebody behaving like that in your cabinet?
Boris is absolutely behind the Florence speech and the line that we have taken.
But what's he got in his hand?
And you've seen what Boris is saying is the importance of the approach that we've taken in the Florence speech. That has moved the discussion on. It has created a momentum in the European negotiations.
We've got to finish very quickly. Is he unsackable?
Look, let's be very clear about what we have here in this government. We have a government that is determined to build a country that works for everyone. And you know what? You talk about Boris's job, you talk about my job.
Yeah.
I think the people watching this programme are actually interested in what we're going to do for their jobs and their futures and their children's futures.
So time is sadly up. Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed. We're out of time.
This was the week he celebrated his victory. Oh, sorry, it was a defeat, wasn't it, in the general election? Well, with a conference that felt more like a religious revivalist meeting than a political event, and saw him preparing for government by wargaming what it would feel like if Labour was in power and sterling collapsed. He could, of course, just ask her, because she inherited a hammered pound and rising inflation after we all voted for Brexit. Now, her mission here in Manchester is to find anyone under 40 or working for the public sector happy to declare themselves Tory and proud, while persuading us that this bloke and this bloke and this bloke just couldn't be happier working under her for just as long as she likes. What a disaster it was for her, winning that election and delivering the largest Tory vote since 1983. Strange times, eh, Allegra?
Indeed, and this conference this morning feels like an incredibly dangerous one for the Prime Minister. She's just been on the BBC in what, frankly, is a bit of a make-or-break interview, and it doesn't seem to have gone well. I'll just give you a selection of tweets in particular. This one here from the Telegraph sketch writer. I almost feel a bit sorry for Theresa May, like watching a dying antelope struggling across the plain, dragging its wooden leg behind it. It is not a very nice tweet, I know that, but it is very, very difficult to find supportive tweets for the Prime Minister this morning. Now, the papers aren't much better for her. Here we have something interesting. This is Sajid Javid, Community Secretary. He's been quite quiet hitherto, but today he is quite critical of the election campaign, and critically, at the end of this interview, he refuses to say whether he supports her going into the next election. A bit more familiar here over on the Sunday Times is from Boris Johnson. Again, he is telling friends that he thinks the Prime Minister will be out within a year, and in that case he'll probably go for it. Why will he probably go for it? Because look at this. This is the all-important graph. This is who Tory members want to be the next leader. Boris Johnson used to be regularly top of this, but he slipped down when he became Foreign Secretary and went a bit quiet. But now, after the last 3 weeks of him intervening and being incredibly brutal, he's gone back up to the top. Now, to be fair to the Conservatives this morning, we've had a slew of policies, including that they will freeze tuition fees, but even that doesn't seem to be going down well. As Kieran Pedley points out in this tweet, the Tories continue to brief diet Labour policies. Why wouldn't students go full fat? Robert.
Lots to chew over with my two chums here in Pastry Corner, Jess Phillips and Grant Shapps. Grant, you wrote a very interesting piece in the Mail on Sunday today, and you reminded everybody that immediately after the election results, she said to backbench MPs she serves at their pleasure. But since then, she's basically been saying she goes on and on. What's changed?
Well, it's the dilemma for a Prime Minister, isn't it? Because if she says she's going to go, then everyone says, well, your power's gone with it. And that's what she fears. But then again, she did come to the backbenchers and say, I got you into this mess, I'm going to get you out of this mess, and I'll serve for as long as you want me to. In other words, I serve at your pleasure. So
and do you think they want her to stay to the next election?
No, I think the reality is that after an election like that, you can't go on till 2022. It's impossible. Let's just be honest about it and say that. I know Sajid Javid's got somewhere close to that in that interview. Of course, it's true what he said. We shouldn't slam somebody for saying something which is true. But in terms of what colleagues think, yes, I think broadly speaking, they believe she's right. We did get into this mess by having an unnecessary election. There is a massive job to do with Brexit. She can stay there and negotiate Brexit, but 2019 is the backstop. And that's when it's over.
So just very briefly, we've got obviously come back to this later, but here in Manchester at the Tory conference, you're not really going to get people excited about what your party can offer if what people see is squabbling over who's going to be the next leader. So shouldn't you just resolve it now so that you can start talking about the policies that the country feels it needs?
Well, I think there are definitely colleagues who feel that way, but I think there's also an opportunity this week particularly on Wednesday, obviously. It's a big speech to the conference for her to sort of reset things. And what she'll need to do is, I think, go beyond. In the past, she's tended to talk about a country that works for everyone, the jams, people stuck in the middle, this, that, and the other. Actually, what we also need to know, and it's one of the reasons why when Boris writes those articles that get all that controversy, they also get a lot of attention, is that he describes a way that Britain can make its way in the world post-Brexit. So we need a bigger, longer-term vision. That's not me saying Boris should deliver it. I think she should deliver it if she can find the way, muster the language to explain that to the nation this week.
We haven't got long now, but I'll come back to talk to greater length in a bit. But just very quickly, is Theresa May staying good or bad for your party, Labour?
Good. It's absolutely...
So you want her to stay as long as possible?
I mean, it's bad for the country, but, you know, for the Labour Party, she is an absolute gift because she's terrible and she, compared to Jeremy Corbyn, she seems wooden and your antelope tweets sound right.
But returning to the Conservative Party conference, if you've had a quick look at the papers this morning, one thing does shine through loud and clear. There are some pretty big questions for Conservatives to answer over the next few days. How do you appeal to young voters without losing the older ones you've got? How do you win Remain voters without losing the Leavers? What do you even do when senior cabinet ministers won't defend the Prime Minister? How do you solve a problem like Theresa? With me now to try and put all those questions to bed are three Conservative Party backbenchers, Nigel Evans, Bim Afalami and Theresa Villiers. Very good morning to all of you. Shall we start with that question about the leadership? And just a show of hands. I mean, how many people want to see Theresa May take the Conservatives into the next general election? How many of you think that she will? That's brilliant. Well done. And on what basis have you arrived at that conclusion, Theresa?
Because she, I think, has the determination to change this country for the better. She's got a strong domestic agenda. Her government is not just about Brexit. Yes, we didn't do as well in the election as we wanted to, but we still got more votes than we have for very many years. The electorate's given us a hung parliament. That means making it work, delivering our policies and supporting our leader.
I mean, but this show of support from the backbenches, fantastic and coordinated though it was, it does stand in stark contrast to the line taken by Community Secretary Sajid Javid, the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, both of whom asked the same question, equivocated.
Well, look, I wouldn't read too much into what Sajid said in particular. I read the interview.
Plenty of people are, and I don't think it's that surprising. If you're asked, do you think your party leader who said, I want to take the party to the next election, if he says he thinks, do you think she should, and he chooses not to answer? I think it's fair for people to read something into that.
Well, look, the question on leadership is a fair one. The way I look at it as a new Member of Parliament is the election has given us another government, but it has also given us a wake-up call and really provided a feedback loop from certain parts of the electorate. We've mentioned young voters, and there are others as well who, frankly, have not been overjoyed over the last few months with and before the election and with the campaign. What we need to do now is to respond to that, but respond to it in a way that's reasoned, thoughtful, strategic, and not sort of trying to outpromise Jeremy Corbyn on everything that he decides are his priorities, because actually we need to have a authentic Conservative response to some of the policy problems, not trying to chase Labour on their ground.
But Nigel, I mean, it's not even a question of overtaking the policy commitments being made by Labour. You're not even coming close to matching them. I mean, he's proposing, for example, we're talking about young people, he's proposing scrapping tuition fees. The Conservative Party at the moment is suggesting that you'll stick firm at £9,250 a year.
Yeah, well, that's because Theresa's being responsible. I mean, he's being totally irresponsible. He's economically illiterate, we all know that. He could promise anything, which he did during the general election. He got a lot of votes thanks to that, but then he had to backtrack as soon as the election was over. I think this conference is going to give Theresa the opportunity to establish herself, put her authority down. You asked that question of us three. We had no problem in answering it. And quite frankly, Sajid and Philip should have answered it too. They've got to get in line. It's thanks to Theresa that they've got their jobs. And as far as I'm concerned, Theresa can and will take us through to the next general election. It's quite simple. You asked the question straight now, and it deserved an answer.
In terms of the the inability, or at least it seems, of the party to attract younger voters at the moment. I mean, the average age of the Conservative Party member is 72 at the moment. Now, given average life expectancy, you've got a couple of fixed-term parliaments before, literally the party is dying off. I mean, is this tinkering with a system that already exists enough of an offer to entice people who are not natural Conservative voters, who've never been Conservative voters, perhaps?
We've got a bunch of young people out there, though, that do support the Conservatives now. It's not as if the average age is dead. It's not. We have got a lot of young people who are really enthusiastic throughout the country, but we've got to do more to attract them.
And the announcement about freezing tuition fees and raising the threshold at which people start to pay back, that is just the start of a broader look at student finance. What we don't want to do is rush into dramatic changes before we've thought them through. But this is a sort of down payment. It's a demonstration that we weren't able to appeal to young people in the way we should have done. We weren't offering them the solutions to the problems they were concerned about. We are going to be working on that.
But Bim, isn't the kind of the elephant in the room in all of this the fact that for large numbers of young voters, the decision to leave the European Union is something with which they disagree, and that's simply something you can't deal with?
Well, in response to that, very simply, yes. A lot of, a majority of young people don't support the decision to leave the European Union. But I also think young people are not a different species. I think it's really important.
I don't know. I see them on Friday night sometimes.
It's really important. I say as a 31-year-old, it's really important that yes, there are issues that for different ages will be more important than others. Grandparents have different concerns from, say, their grandchildren. But actually, it's what a responsible Conservative government does is try and unite all those different concerns around a positive policy agenda. Around student tuition fees and student loans, this is the beginning of a review into that whole system. Various people will have different views about how we do that, and I just think it's really important that in government you've got to be responsible and not behave like an irresponsible opposition.
I just want to conclude our chat with Eric Pickles, of course, has just published his review of the disastrous election, and he pulls a few punches, but the one area in which he doesn't is suggesting that the party leader should not have complete control over the manifesto. What do you think of that?
Well, she didn't have any control over the last manifesto, from what I can make out. That was part of the problem. She had people at number 10 who were making decisions where people like ourselves were sidelined. Indeed, even somebody like George Freeman, who should have been in charge of policy, was frozen out as well. We really did pay a very, very heavy price because of that stupidity. You talk about trying to attract the young. We attacked the young and we attacked the old. There was hardly anybody left that we didn't attack.
The final say on the manifesto, of course, has to go to the party leader, but we do need a much more transparent process for putting it together.
Well, thank you all very much. Plenty for us to discuss. It's going to be an interesting conference. I think we'll at least all agree on that. Thanks very much for being with us.
Well, Theresa May arrives here for her second Tory conference as leader, but it's her first without a parliamentary majority. The government has been taking stock after that disastrous election campaign and is seeking to use this conference to talk to voters who've been tempted by Jeremy Corbyn in June. So what have they got to offer? Well, the Conservatives are planning to look again at the entire system of student finance. With anger among some sections of the public at the rising costs of attending university, fees will be frozen immediately at £9,250 a year. And there could soon be lower fees for students studying certain subjects. If you started university from 2012 onwards, you're currently set to begin making loan repayments when you earn £21,000 a year. That will now be raised to £25,000, which means a saving of £360 a year for those above the new threshold. On housing, the government's making a pledge to build 1 million new homes by 2020. That is something the Conservatives have promised since before Theresa May even became Prime Minister. But there will be an extra £10 billion injected into the Help to Buy scheme, which ministers say will allow roughly 135,000 new buyers to get a mortgage with just a 5% deposit. And it's not only homeowners that the Tories are pitching to. The Communities Secretary, Sajid Javid, wants rental tenants to feel looked after as well, so he has re-announced a crackdown on unscrupulous landlords and rogue letting agents. Earlier this morning, the Prime Minister was on the Andrew Marr Show, where she spoke about some of the lessons she'd learned from the Conservative campaign in June.
I think the key message from that election for me, one of the key messages was that obviously we didn't get across what we were doing in terms of a country that works for everyone and really wanting to build on that. I think what we also saw from the election is that as Conservatives, the arguments that we thought we'd had and won during the 1980s about the importance of free market economies, I think we thought there was a general consensus on that, and we now see that there wasn't, and we now need to make those arguments again.
So that was the Prime Minister a little earlier this morning. I'm going to talk to the panel about what you made of that interview as well as some of what she had to say. Did she do what she needed to, do you think, to reintroduce herself to the country and the party?
She tried and literally at one point referred back to when she was first on the steps of number 10 and saying she wanted to return to that agenda. But here was someone, it was fascinating, that hour or whatever it was, who cannot transcend the new context. Because since that moment where she tried to redefine the agenda, she in effect lost an election, lost an overall majority. And however hard she tried to suggest there was momentum in policies, unity in the cabinet, clearly there can't be. And that's not down to her at this particular moment, it's down to the context of that election which has changed everything and made her incredibly weak, a Prime Minister who in effect lost.
And she's talking there in that clip that we showed, Isabel, about arguments she thought had been won in the 1980s about how the free market operates. And we've seen some of this play out this week. Jeremy Corbyn saying that actually he's now in the centre ground of British politics, and Theresa May then feeling she had to make a speech to defend free market economics. Is the centre ground shifting, do you think? Do they have to refight those arguments of the 80s?
Well, absolutely. That's one of many very big challenges that the Prime Minister faces. I saw the Prime Minister as she left that interview with Andrew Marr this morning, and she was wearing her usual rictus grin. It's not going to fool anybody. This is the messiest and the most uneasy start to a party conference that I have seen in 10 years. It is a very, very uncomfortable start to the week, and I do feel somebody has already made this point from the Labour Party this morning on one of the other political shows, that the Prime Minister might do well to do her big speech either today or tomorrow to try to reset the narrative. As it is, she's not speaking until the middle of the week, by which point the whole conference will have been dominated by Boris talk and leadership questions.
And so how important will Theresa May's speech itself actually be, Tom?
Absolutely crucial. I would go so far as to say if the Andrew Marr interview this morning was probably one of the most important of her entire career in Number 10, then certainly her speech on Wednesday is going to be up there with the most important speech she has to make, to simply allow her to continue. She absolutely has to show leadership. She has to buy the confidence back of the party, which is at an all-time low. And, you know, you can only really do that from the podium by totally nailing it. And there was a huge error I thought she made in the Andrew Marr interview this morning. Right at the end, he tackled on the great Boris question. It's dreadful, isn't it? Boris is going to dominate this party conference as well as many previous ones. We go back to the days of Cameron and Boris, where Boris used to upstage David Cameron, especially in the years of opposition. And it's going to happen again. And when asked, is Boris unsackable? The answer to that, everybody knows, is no. Nobody is unsackable. But she refused to answer that, and that does make her look really terribly weak.
And we can take a quick look at what's in the Sunday Times this morning, where Boris Johnson has been telling people she thinks that Theresa May will be gone in a year. What's he playing at as well? Is he trying to get sacked?
Well, I mean, I think this is a classic Boris. You know, he, as Tom said, he's been doing this for years before party conference. The difference this time compared to when it was David Cameron is that this is really serious. She is really genuinely vulnerable. And when Theresa May gives interviews saying she will lead the party into the next election, literally nobody believes that. She has to say it, but it's clearly not sustainable.
Is it all about Boris this week? Is that what everybody will be talking about in the conference corridors?
Well, there's a broader context. It's partly about Brexit. And as ever with Tory conferences, it will be dominated by the issue of Europe. I went to the one after they fell out of the exchange rate mechanism in 1992, and that's when this all began to become so highly charged. And here, I can't work how many years later, it remains highly charged. So it's partly about that. It's partly about the leadership, because as we've all agreed, she is in a very vulnerable, precarious position. So it's a combination of things, but there is a sort of familiar pattern in which he becomes a dominant figure during the week. That doesn't necessarily mean there is always follow-through. But this time he seems to be going for it.
I mean, it's not just Boris, you know, it's about a younger generation, a lot of little beasts at the moment. And one of the problems that she's got is a lot of the littler beasts actually think they're big beasts at the moment, or they're gearing up to be big beasts.
Because they think there's space there for beasts
and they are
to
trying
grow
to build
into.
a following. So I'm hearing a lot about, for example, James Cleverly at the moment. He's a backbencher. Nobody's probably heard of them.
He made himself heard of the other day when he said, I want to be PM. And I think Steve is right when he says nothing has changed. The practical realities of the election still are as they are. She has no majority. She has little chance of really pursuing a full domestic agenda, and Brexit is still a mighty problem. But
so they're trying to move on to the domestic agenda, clearly, this morning with these announcements about help buying, about students. Will that work?
No, it won't. And here's the reason why. Because they don't have a parliamentary majority to do radical things. They have to tiptoe incredibly carefully through everything they do. But also, back to Brexit, one thing has changed since the general election, significantly on Brexit, and that's the Florence speech. During the Florence speech, Theresa May tacked in quite considerably to compromise with the EU to offer another 20 billion quid during the transition period for 2 more years, and that has caused a significant splinter in the surface Tory party unity on Brexit within the cabinet, within the party. She now no longer has the full confidence of the hardcore Brexiteers, which is where Boris Johnson's opportunity quite clearly is coming from.
It is not since Edward Heath has a Conservative Prime Minister who lost the parliamentary majority, then got on to fight another election. Theresa May is, of course, still in Downing Street, but for how long? The American pollster Frank Luntz's focus group successfully predicted David Cameron's rise back to power back in 2005, and in 2007 he forecast Gordon Brown's demise, and now he has returned to the UK to anticipate what might happen next in British politics.
The most famous door in the world. Theresa May still lives there. The question is, for how long? Her attempt to shore up her support through the election fell flat with voters, and now there are even whispers that there'll be a challenge to her leadership. But where will that leadership challenge come from? It could be from right around that cabinet table, or perhaps someone from the next generation. We've got 3 simple questions here. First, she asserts that she will stay until the next general election. Can she? Second, will Conservative MPs allow her to stay? And third, who is best positioned to replace her if they make her go? Our audience consists of strong Conservatives and Conservative-leaning floating voters, the swing voters that determine which political party controls the government. So while many of the people in this room are not able to vote in a Conservative leadership election, they are well placed to tell us how any leader would fare with the public. Word or phrase to describe Theresa May?
Marmite.
Marmite?
Love it or hate it. I don't think she's very convincing as a leader.
Is your dislike of her because of her policies or because of her attributes?
It's because she didn't win. If she had of, it would be a totally different scenario. We would have all woken up the next day and it would have been, Rule Britannia, we're going into this strong, and unfortunately she didn't.
And she's not doing the right leadership things. You know, people are popping up beside her, making rather sordid remarks and comments, and she should just oust those people.
When she came in to lead, I was very impressed with her, and I thought she was going to make a good leader. And then she put that manifesto out, and she alienated so many people, including me.
Someone defend her.
She could have turned and run, she could have quit, they were calls for her to resign, and she actually didn't. She stood firm, she faced everybody head on, and she's just got on with the job.
I wanted Theresa May to be Mrs Thatcher, strong,
Yes.
able, that can push us through Britain. I don't care whether she has...
Who agrees with that?
Yes.
Who wanted her to be?
Yes.
So particularly over here, is she Margaret Thatcher? No. How does Brexit and guiding Britain out of the EU, does that make you like her more or less?
More. Brexit is so important to us now. If we start chopping and changing, the world is going to keep us as a laughing stock. And that's why it's not whether I like her or not. It's that we have to keep her to keep our status quo and our momentum.
Yes, and she's doing a good job. She's got no one is going to agree with every decision she makes. No one is going to agree with everything. It is like a divorce.
We asked our audience to watch some of the Prime Minister's speeches, and we gave each of them a dial to rate her performance on a second-by-second basis. I can see the results, but our audience can't. The red line shows what hardcore conservative voters think, and the green line shows what the floating voters think. A score below 50 shows a negative reaction, while anything above a 60 indicates that our audience likes what they hear.
It means accepting that the road ahead will be uncertain at times, but believing that it leads towards a brighter future for our country's children and grandchildren too.
I've been watching your reaction, and a lot of you are pretty flat. Little bit positive, but only a little bit. She's leading, for many of you, she's leading your party, and she is your prime minister. But the dials show a reaction that's really, really neutral.
She's not speaking on her own behalf. She's speaking on behalf of the 52%, and not the 48%. So it's not surprising that it's only slightly positive.
It's not from the heart. She's just paying lip service.
There is something slightly lacking in her delivery. There's some strength.
You guys agree with that?
I like what she said.
I do like her speech.
I absolutely 100% admire her professionalism. She's utmost professional, but she needs more passion and empathy with everyone around her who's trying to support her and belief in what she's doing.
She was trying to come across genuine there, but it was a little bit underplayed.
If Theresa May leads the Conservatives into the next general election, who thinks the Conservatives win the next general election? Raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of you. So 15 of you don't. So you want her to lead the Conservatives, but you actually don't think she can win it. Why?
Because she started something that she's got to finish now. Yeah. Going forward, going through Brexit and everything, you know, people may change their minds.
Why do you think she wouldn't win?
She's not a natural-born leader. We need someone in there who can actually go to talks, stop dealing with minutiae matters and get on with the actual negotiating that we really need.
And who that person is exactly what we're going to talk about when we come back.
Let's return to the Sunday Politics Focus Group. In part one, we heard our panel of Conservative voters and some people who are prepared to consider voting for the party tell the American pollster Frank Luntz what they made of Theresa May. Most of them thought she would not win the next general election. So if she goes before then, who should be her successor? Here's Frank Luntz once more.
Moments ago, we talked about Theresa May and what you thought of the Prime Minister and who should lead this country. Now we're going to get specific. Of course, until there is a leadership contest, any number of candidates could come forward. But we looked at the 5 potential contenders who have repeatedly performed well in surveys of party members and opinion poll. Looking at this list, and you see these 5, and you see her, does this make you want to make a change? Raise your hands. Less than half of you. Who says status quo? So you're not turned on by this list. How come? It was backbench MP and government outsider Jacob Rees-Mogg who got the strongest first reaction.
I think he has some opinions on gay marriage that I don't think would settle well with the rest of the country.
He's a conviction politician, which is something the Conservative Party is badly missing at the moment.
Let's remove this. We then asked our audience to watch clips of each potential candidate and again use our dials to rate what they saw. A score of over 60 was a positive reaction and anything under 50 is a negative, with the red line representing loyal Conservatives and the green line representing floating Conservatives. First up was Brexit Secretary David Davis.
This is a historic and positive moment for our nation.
Particularly with those on this side, he was off the charts. Why?
I think it's quite easy to accept coming from David Davis because he voted to leave, whereas Theresa May voted to remain. So I think there's a lot of credibility in what he was saying.
He was just really positive. The passion just came across so clearly.
Would you like him to lead Britain through Brexit rather than Theresa May?
He's already got a big job.
So you want him there?
Yeah.
We knew what...
Then came Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Somebody mentioned HS2. I happen to agree that that would not be my priority for spending. I personally would raid the overseas aid budget, which I think is too big.
Right at the top of the scales.
It's very straight to the point and people can understand what he's saying, I think.
He has a posh accent, but that's not to say that he doesn't know what he's not one of the people. He is one of the people, and he's knowledgeable, and I trust him.
He names specific things. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Good thing.
Do they resonate with you?
Absolutely.
Because?
Because the money he wants to move from one place to another is what I would do myself.
But what about those views on abortion and same-sex marriage?
But hold on. None of these issues are party political. They are issues that are decided by Parliament on free votes. They are not determined by the Prime Minister.
What's your reaction to that?
What he's doing is he's separating his own religious beliefs from his position as a politician.
It's obviously a personality contest, and that is not going to get you favour with the vote.
I think I fundamentally disagree with his opinion, but I think he articulated himself incredibly well.
The deficit is down by 3/4.
Chancellor Philip Hammond was next. Of everyone you've seen speak, you're even laughing because you know what I'm going to tell you. Why?
She's so dull.
It's very simple. He could be an accountant.
He said to people on low income that they're £1,600 better off or something, 1,400, whatever. And that must really offend people who know they're not in real terms.
Did he connect to you at all?
Not really.
Why not?
Really dull, boring, just bland. I would fall asleep.
It's good with the number crunching, but for anything else, I don't think it's going to be anything.
Then we moved on to Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson.
We vote leave and take back control. I believe that this Thursday can be our country's Independence Day.
Could you ever imagine him leading the Conservatives into an election?
Yeah, absolutely.
Who could imagine it? Raise your hands.
He's a Columbo character. You may think he's a buffoon, but underneath it, it's all going in. He's very, very intelligent. Yeah.
But then we played this clip.
I think one thing in particular that we are looking at is measures to. Hang on a second.
He should know the content of the Queen's speech. If he doesn't know the content, he was exceedingly badly prepared, which is poor.
That doesn't make you feel worse about him?
No, not in the slightest.
Why?
Because it's a rare time that he's got it wrong, but most of the time he gets it right. And you know he'll waffle from time to time, and then you just forgive him because it's Boris.
Finally, Home Secretary Amber Rudd. She stood in for the Prime Minister in that leaders' debate. Could she stand in and lead the Conservative Party?
I just don't think she's got the fire.
I think she's very capable.
I don't think she's leadership material. She's backroom staff.
Yeah. I would agree.
Let's bring the board in. We then asked the audience to vote, one by one, for each person they would eliminate from any potential leadership race. Philip Hammond was quick to go, followed swiftly by Home Secretary Amber Rudd. But the next casualty was a surprise. I want one more to go.
Boris.
So what's the issue?
The Tories need him, but not as Prime Minister.
He's the warm-up act.
Yeah.
The warm-up act.
He's the warm-up act.
If the decision is... The audience was split on whether Theresa May should be replaced as Prime Minister by one of our two remaining candidates. Even though Britain is leaving, you want her to remain. But I got a definitive response on whether she should stay long-term. And now let's say the negotiations are over, Brexit has happened, and it's time for a new election. All else being equal, who do you want to lead the Conservatives into the next election? Who says the Prime Minister? And not one of you. In my professional history, this is the first time my focus group is unanimous in not supporting the incumbent. And then it was time to determine the winner. Who says Jacob Rees-Mogg? 8, 10, 12. Who says David Davis? 10, 12. 12, 12, and someone who doesn't like either of them. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your government.
So that's what Frank Luntz and his focus group found. Tom, what's your reaction to the idea that they don't want Theresa May leading them into the next election, but a choice between David Davis and Jacob Rees-Mogg?
I think that's quite accurate if it wasn't for the fact that your suggestions were so limited. If there is merely a choice between continuity under Theresa or someone completely different, I think the Conservative Party would definitely choose someone completely different. Despite the protestations of incredible loyalty from ministers, cabinet ministers, you have Brandon Lewis in that seat a few minutes ago saying the same thing. They don't want her to stay either. The big thing missing in all that for me is the real candidates who will run, including the people most people may not have heard of. Tory backbenchers from the 2015, even 2017 intake, young, bright, highly impressive. For me, the next Tory leader will be, from one and name, will be none of the above.
Could, of course, depend on when it happens, whether there's time for some of those new, younger backbenchers to establish themselves before there's an election. We were talking there about a scenario in which it might happen soon. And having watched that focus group, Steve, do you think Mogmentum behind Jacob Rees-Mogg, is it a thing?
Well, evidently that focus group suggests it is to some extent, but not in an overwhelming way, and I suspect that by the time of a leadership contest that momentum will have subsided. But you're right, it depends when it is and the context. Will it take place after Brexit, i.e. after March 2019? Will it take place next month? But as Michael Heseltine said in your interview with him, there's no point changing the singer if the song remains the same, i.e. if Boris got in the next 6 weeks, insisted on his new red lines, found he couldn't get those new red lines into a transitional deal, he would have to go within about 6 weeks after arriving. So the song is as much as of a problem as the singer, though we all know, as that focus group suggests, the singer will be gone by the time of the election.
I mean, that focus group is great fun, you know, it's entertaining viewing, and Frank Luntz is above all a showman, but I think we have to bear in mind that this is very unscientific, and I would agree with Tom about the next Prime Minister probably, or the next party leader will probably come from the next generation. The polling I'm interested in today is by Lord Ashcroft, partly because the scale of the polling that he's done is so enormous, 20,000 people, and he has looked at 13 different measures on which people might vote for a party. Does the party stand for people like me? Is the party's heart in the right place? Does it stand up for fairness and opportunity? And worryingly for the Tories, I would go so far as to say alarmingly for the Tories, on 11 out of 13 of those measures, they are behind Labour, and they are only just a tiny bit in front of Labour on competence. That is seriously worrying for the Conservative brand.
And so to what extent, when people are asked those questions about whether or not they feel the Conservative Party represents them, does that depend on who the leader is? Well,
that's a really good question, and I think what we can tell from this is that the problems with the brand are really fundamental, and actually David Cameron just managed to overcome that, but really it never particularly went away, that problem.
No. I think that's the point of a new face. If the brand is bad and is just descending, as the Ashcroft polling would suggest, you're not going to turn those polls around unless you change the brand. You've got to change change the entire cabinet, quite frankly. It needs to look a very, very new offer.
What, a really substantial reshuffle? Does Theresa May have the authority to do that, to clear out the cabinet?
No, she doesn't, but this is where I think the next generation leadership will come from. I think there's an agreement now that, perhaps not amongst Boris Johnson and David Davis, but there is a feeling that it's time for a new generation. Theresa May's really important job, and she's probably got anything from a year to 2 or 3 to do this, is to build a bridge to that. And that means promoting these people into some impressive jobs, giving them the sort of space which they can, make a name for themselves.
I just want to make one other...
Just on that, it means you'll then have to sack a lot of cabinet ministers to create those spaces.
That's and powerful enemies on the backbenches.
Yeah, I mean, look what happened when she sacked George Osborne.
Well, exactly. We know what he wants to do with her now. That sounds positively dangerous.
Creating space involves very strong leadership, because cabinet reshuffles are tough when you've got a majority of 180. So even doing that, she's very, very constrained, I think.
I would just make one other point, which is it all feels very dramatic. Here we are, we're sort of in a bubble, moved from London up here to Manchester. She does have the benefit of time. The party has the benefit of time. There could be at least 4 years before the next election. We've seen a huge amount happen in 6 months. So just imagine how much can change in the next year, in the next 2 years.
But that assumes that she can hold on to her leadership for that amount of time.
Really
of the many things that Boris has been up to, an interview with you, Tom, but he's also made it clear that he's worried about the leadership going to the next generation if there isn't a contest within the next year, and it looks like he's trying to orchestrate it for that very reason.
I have to say, having spent quite a large time with him last week and watching him quite closely, I think that's precisely what he's doing. And again, it comes down to Florence. Florence has given him an opportunity. Theresa May is now beginning to compromise with Brussels. That angers the Brexiteers. That is Boris's chance. And I think, Theresa May will really struggle to remain leader of her party and get any version of Brexit through, simply because her party can't even coalesce on what Brexit, the final deal, the future relationship should look like, let alone the country. And I think, that is why she becomes vulnerable from anything from a year onwards. October 2018, when she starts to have to finalise this Article 50 deal, that is going to, when you make choices, you alienate people, and that is when a huge vulnerability will begin.
Well, we're just about out of time. Let's just finish by asking you all the question we started with at the top. Will Theresa May still be the leader of the Conservative Party at the next general election?
Oh, definitely not. But she could well be by this time next year.
No way. Absolutely no way.
Will she lead them into the next election?
No.
All right, well, we've got unanimity on the panel there anyway. Thank you very much.
But first, though, let's hear from someone who has seen more than his share of party confidence.
No, I think that's the sort of thing that he's bound to say, but it bears no relationship with the truth. I mean, his views on defence policy hark back to the more extreme elements of the Labour Party of the 60s and 70s and 80s. His views on nationalisation were born in another century under Karl Marx and were tried extensively in this country and were a lamentable failure. And his whole approach to society, I think, is to sort of create an image of society which, in practical terms, doesn't work,
Still, there has been something of a sea change. Some of those ideas, that underpin the kind of the neoliberal revolution of the past few years, the free markets, the idea of deregulation, privatisation, people are coming round to a different way of thinking on every one of those.
Well, you say people. There are some people. I spend a lot of my time with Labour councillors, Labour leaders in the real world, and they are in dismay about the prospect of a Corbyn-led Labour Party. So, of course, you're quite right to point out to an element of the Corbyn phenomenon. It has achieved a certain sort of vision for a certain sort of generation. But I think you have to ask why. What is the background that has created this hunger for change? And when you analyse that, I find it common across the Western world in the post-2008 crash. It's produced an extremism on the right, looking for very simple and really rather unattractive solutions to try and persuade people that there is something that's going to change the frustrations of their life, the frozen living standards, the job losses that have characterized a lot of the last decade, and the nationalism, the suspicion of foreigner, the immigration issues, they all bubble up in circumstances of this sort. Now, of course, you do get an alternative, the other end, the visionary, you nationalize everything type approach. But the real issues that are undermining the stability of governments recently, I think, are much more to do with those basic political issues of uncertainty and fear and the immigration issue, which is all part of it, the job insecurity. These are the issues, and the frozen living standards, particularly since 2008.
Still, I remember Theresa May making her first speech on the doorstep of Number 10, before even crossing the threshold properly, say now was the time to look again at the kind of the free market. Now was the time to look at the corporate excesses that have brought so much pain to so many people. And then she did pretty much nothing about it. Indeed, we have her at the Bank of England, not making the case for capitalism, not making the case for reform of capitalism.
Well, personally, I've always taken great pride in the fact that some of the great reforms of the free market have been led by Conservative administrations. I mean, it was the Conservatives who took the women out of the mines and the children out of the chimneys in the 19th century. It was Disraeli who gave the working men the vote. It was Neville Chamberlain associated with great public sector reforms. And if you look at modern society, it is driven in the main by a partnership between the public sector and the capitalist system, but in a regulated climate. I mean, regulations, the interference of government to insist on standards, is actually the hallmark of civilization. We do not live in a jungle economy.
Indeed, but at the same time, I mean, look at young people who, frankly, are deserting the Conservative cause in droves, and many of them who would not have countenanced voting for the Conservatives, you know, a few years ago, can never see themselves voting for them. The reason being, well, they find it difficult to get a job. When they do have a job, it's not paying them what they feel that they should be earning. And even when they do get a job that pays them a decent amount of money, they're finding it so incredibly difficult to get onto the housing ladder. We hear Theresa May talking about, you know, the social contract, that every generation should experience better conditions. I mean, in terms of the Conservative performance since 2010, I mean, the social contract's been broken, hasn't it?
Well, you see, I think that there are different causes affecting the young. It's a lack of vision. And it's very difficult to see how, in the context of Brexit, you produce a vision. And what every government has got to do is to have an effective programme. It has to have a vision as to the journey, purpose, where it's going to be, and then it has to have unity. Now, in the conference which is about to take place, what we're going to see in practice is a sort of fully dressed but totally revealing political beauty contest, in which the contenders will be all out there strutting their stuff. And that is the worst sort of background for a government that ought to be concentrating, first of all, on its programme for government, and secondly, on the vision as to where it should go. Now, the vision is bound to include harnessing the forces of enterprise, much better word, if I may say so, than capitalist, the forces of enterprise in order to serve the wider causes of public.
Now, I didn't, of course, want to discuss the Conservative leadership political programmes on Sunday. You never delve into this topic. You dragged me on to it. Boris Johnson. You know, there is a man with a vision. We've heard plenty about it twice now for Brexit. What on earth is he up to?
Well, we all know what he's up to. He's making sure that his present position as the most favourite to succeed Theresa May is maintained. It is a campaign. It's always happened. It's what politics, competition is all about, and Boris is a master of it. Whether he'll win or not is another matter altogether, but we all know what he's doing.
Master of it? Well, that's the point. I mean, he's had huge amounts of criticism from even some, you know, right-leaning newspapers on these two separate occasions on which he's decided to intervene. OK, in your mind, I mean, given the problems that we've been discussing about where the Conservative Party is right now, where the party is as regards young people, I mean, is Boris Johnson the man to sort it out?
Well, personally, his views on Brexit are quite unacceptable. I understand who he's appealing to. He's appealing to an elderly part of the society, many of them members of the Conservative Party, and he is appealing to those elements of their personal conviction that he thinks are most likely to trigger support for him. And I understand those arguments, but they're phony, they're duplicitous, they bear no relationship. Look at Bombardier, what's going on there. That's the real world of international trade, as anybody who's spent any time in the export market fully understands. And so talking about a sort of world hungry for new British exporters to suddenly come over the horizon is just talking about something that doesn't exist.
I mean, you yourself have a degree of form when it comes to intransigence and insurrection within the Conservative Party. Actually, you know, squint your eyes, former MP for Henley, you know, occasionally unruly mop of hair, ability to annoy female Conservative Prime Ministers. I mean, do you think Boris Johnson is in any way emulating what you got up to?
Well, I think that you have to redraw the character. I was the person that Margaret Thatcher relied on time and time again to carry through Conservative policies. The right to buy, self-evidently, the battle against CND, the reduction in the size of the public sector in the various departmental activities, the work I did on the inner cities, all of this with the support of Margaret Thatcher. It was only on a specific issue that we clashed.
And you resigned? So should Theresa May sack Boris Johnson?
Well, I resigned. I think it's very difficult for Boris to go on making the sort of interventions that he is and remain within the government.
So should Theresa May replace him?
Well, I think that the case for sacking Boris is very strong, except in one crucial way, that the danger of doing it in the fragmentation of Parliament today is perhaps a bigger risk. And so leaving him there until he completely oversteps the mark is a wise thing to do. Whether it is right, in most circumstances it would be wrong. In these circumstances it might be the only option.
It strikes me that there are two separate issues here. One, whether or not Boris Johnson has the ability to take over the leadership of the Conservative Party. The second question follows on from that. If he has, is he the right man to beat Jeremy Corbyn at the next general election, whenever that might be?
Well, my own guess, the election will be in a couple of years' time. And I think that the Conservatives are going to be lumbered with the failures of Brexit. I see no way in which the Conservatives can actually transform the performance of the economy in the 2 years from now to the next election.
So who should be the next leader of the Conservative Party, given that timescale?
My view is quite clear. At the moment, I haven't seen somebody who's prepared to recognise that the song has to be changed, not just the singer. Interestingly enough, Ruth Davidson, in the first break I've seen from the counter-Brexit side of the argument today, has begun to qualify the sort of position. But this whole thing is unsustainable. You cannot have a government in which various members of the cabinet are voicing opinions which are not consistent one with the other.
I mean, you say it's unsustainable, but at what point does Theresa May either feel that she no longer has the authority to carry on, or the election process is set in motion?
Well, I don't think it'll be her decision. The point, you asked the right question, is the point at which the parliamentary party said we've had enough.
Mm. In terms of Brexit, do you think that the party will ultimately see this process through?
Well, I hope not. And there are grounds for believing it's possible. Not likely. At the moment, it looks as though Brexit is likely to happen. But for my money, events will intervene, public opinion will change, and the party will realise that as Labour will actually become increasingly anti-Brexit, the Tories are going to be left lumbered with the responsibility for this thing.
But do you ever find it quite lonely, being in this position? I mean, as things stand, I mean, there's not a single MP in any party at the moment who appears to agree with you. It's yourself, it's Tony Blair, to an extent it's Vince Cable. Do you feel like you're on the right side of the argument, given the weight of opinion against you, in the House of Commons?
Well, I know what a lot of those members think. They may not say it, and I understand why they don't say it, because politics is about tribes, and there are great penalties to pay for appearing to differ from your tribe. But I'm not interested in any of those penalties. My question is, am I right? And I parade in support of myself every Conservative leader since Winston Churchill, all of whom believed that Britain's self-interest was inextricably interwoven with Europe. I believe it today, and I know large numbers of MPs do believe it too. Where is the voice who will change the song?
You've been working for the party since the 1950s. How much difficulty, how much trouble is the Conservative Party in right now?
I think it is in serious risk of not winning the next election. If it goes on as it is now, I'm appalled. I find it almost incredible, having been in the House of Commons with Jeremy Corbyn for all those years, so knowing something of his views and something of the Labour's views. I find it almost incredible to hear myself saying it, But analysing the way things are going, looking at the opinion polls, anticipating events as I think they'll unfold, it is now a very serious risk.
Lord Heseltine, many thanks for being with us.
Thank you.